Yeah, hell of a weekend in League One. We got managerial sackings. We got drama down the bottom. We've also got the top five all winning, which is pretty impressive. We did the run-in analysis last week. We wondered about Wrexham versus Wycombe for second spot. We wondered about Charlton and Stockport, would they bounce back from defeats? And as we have been all season, we're wondering how many points will Birmingham City get? And all five of those teams stepped up over the weekend and picked up all 3 points. Birmingham beating Shrews by 4 goals to 1. Only the second time all season that they've scored 4 goals, both of them at home. The other one was at home to Cambridge United. And it was set pieces that was kind of the order of things to unlock it for Birmingham. The first one was a Dowell delivery for Davies. The second one was a Leonard delivery for Ethan Laird. Birmingham 2-0 up, a game that they were controlling and dominating, but still needed those set-piece situations to get them ahead and then double their lead. Alfie May enjoying himself towards the end to the tune of 2 goals. I wondered if it's worth just having a small chat about Jay Stansfield, who didn't score in this game, and it's not really fair to expect someone to score 1 million goals just because they are, the record ever transfer fee at the level. But I hope it's all right to say, and I caveat it with, as a young player and a young person that I really love and really want to do incredibly well. I expected that he would score more goals in League One this season, particularly playing for a team, on course for 100 points. I hope we can have that conversation in a way that isn't seen as, I'm getting the flamethrower out or I'm hugely criticising him. But for a player who is very good at shooting, and we saw it last season, his movement, excellent. His finishing, excellent. I just wanted to raise it really because, he is second top scorer in the league. Clearly a lot of those goals have been from the penalty spot. As someone who prefers to know how many goals someone has scored outside of penalties, because I think that's a stronger reflection of performance level and more fair to compare them to others in the division who don't take pens for their team and whose teams don't get as many pens. This is a guy he has scored 0.38 non-penalty goals per 90, which is fairly middling, I would suggest. That's the 16th best in the league for players that have played more than 1,300 minutes, and 13 players that have scored more non-penalty goals this season. It's one where it's worth pointing out, George, that his pressing is immense, a huge part of his game, and all of his pressing data, counter pressures, tackles when adjusted for possession. He's basically the best in the league when it comes to that. But that's probably not what you spend all the money on. It's probably the goal scoring, and it's probably that side of his game that has him considered one of the brightest young strikers in the English pyramid. So I just wondered, if you had any takes or any thoughts, maybe the pressure, the expectation, fatigue from the fixture list as to why Stansfield hasn't been plundering goals maybe to the level that we might have expected in this Blues side.
A few thoughts. I mean, it was never a value for money play anyway. I think it's basically impossible to be worth what Birmingham paid for him in League One. That's not to say that he can't in time be a value signing. Maybe he'll end up being the player that leads Birmingham to the Premier League next season or the season afterwards, and then he'll be worth more than the 10, 15, 20 million that they paid for him, depending on who you listen to. So yeah, I mean, I take your point. I think with Birmingham fans as well, they'll feel like they know how good he is because this is his second season at the club. He obviously shows his quality in other ways apart from scoring goals. The goals that he does score are often suggesting of a player of a much higher caliber than the level. He's obviously a very, very good ball striker, albeit his penalties were a bit strange towards the end of his penalty duties. So yeah, I think you can both be underwhelmed with what he's done at League One level, whilst also appreciating that he has been quite an important part of a team who have ended up being incredibly dominant at League One too. So yeah, as I said at the beginning of the season, I still think that a League One club paying that kind of money for a player is frankly ridiculous because you don't have to do that in order to be good in League One. But in order to secure the services of a player that they obviously got massive hopes for, who's very young, we'll have to see whether or not it ages well. But yeah, I kind of agree. But maybe also we have to remember he's still young, still hasn't played that much football, and just because they bought him for a lot of money, he's not therefore entitled just to be one of the best players in the league immediately in terms of his output.
100%. And there's definitely a case where I think realistically in the Championship next season, he's going to be attacking against teams that aren't just packing their defensive third with defensive bodies. There should be more space for him to play into. And I think his movement is a real strong part of his game. I think he's someone that would prefer to be running into space than, basically bouncing off big defenders, because physically and aerially is not a huge strength of his. So interesting one. Birmingham going well. Clearly, as you can tell, we're looking for new things to say about this team that is 9 points clear with 2 games in hand and are well on course for 100 points. And it was another resounding victory. It wasn't even probably the worst or even second worst thing that's happened to Shrewsbury Town in the last week, George, because not only did their manager leave them somewhat out of the blue, or dare I say completely out of the blue, for a team in the league below, Gareth Ainsworth leaving Shrewsbury for Gillingham. But what that suggested, outside of just the bare facts, was that the proposed takeover that Shrews fans have been waiting for and hoping for some time now, they want to move into a different era off the pitch, feel that the club needs to do that. And then today we see that the period of exclusivity that a prospective owner has now expired, and they could be back to square one on that front. So essentially an absolute horror show of a week for Shrewsbury Town.
Yeah. And I think given the news of the takeover falling through, it probably sheds a little bit of light on Gareth Ainsworth's decision to trade Shrewsbury for Gillingham, which on the face of it doesn't look that, a Shrewsbury side who were, we thought, about to be bought by an American businessman, moving to a club in Gillingham who have been bought by an American businessman and haven't done particularly well since they were. Didn't make massive sense, but you have to assume that he feels like the future of the club as he was sold it has probably changed as to what was coming beforehand. And yeah, the outpouring of frustration from Shrewsbury fans we can completely understand. They look fairly doomed to me. I was pretty surprised to see Michael Appleton take the job at Shrewsbury. It seems like you're in a bit of a hiding to nothing. People always seem to associate managers who come into a club even when they're all but relegated and take them down as effectively taking them down, which obviously isn't true. But even when Gary Rowett was appointed manager of Oxford, you saw some people being like, he relegated Birmingham last season. It's like, well, no. If you come into a club who are already on their way down and improve their results but go down, there's some merit to that. But yeah, it feels like a club at the moment who are spiralling somewhat on the pitch and off the pitch. It didn't feel like this was going to happen when not that long ago they were beating Birmingham, they were beating Wrexham. Survival looked back on, the takeover was going through, there was reason to be positive, and it's all unravelled incredibly quickly.
George, tell me about second place Wrexham and third place Wycombe, both doing the business and winning to 0. Wrexham at Exeter, Wycombe at home to Lincoln.
Yeah, Wrexham have kept 6 clean sheets in the last 7 in the league now.
That'll do it.
They've just completely gone from being the entertainers, Hollywood FC, to now just being, this is Parky ball. They've parked any of that previous ridiculous attacking threat. Well, not threat, but just those crazy games that we saw, especially at home. It's now all just grinding out results. And this was on that measure as well. They didn't concede too much by way of opportunity. They went ahead through a deflected effort from range from Rathbone. They made the point safe after a period where they had to hurt for some time through a penalty from Jay Rodriguez. This is a Wrexham side who don't concede much, and they always find some way to score goals, even if it's not particularly pretty or the attacking threat isn't really that relentless. For Wycombe, it feels like a really significant win. Things haven't been going overly well since Matt Bloomfield left, and with Wrexham's relentless form, they're kind of having to keep up with him. But to get the win, it was a well-taken goal as well from Cameron Humphreys, in front of the home fans.
Lovely little player.
It was important.
Great
player.
Not only did I instantly think to myself, lovely little player, specifically in a Cockney accent as well, but my second thought was, not enough of them in the game these days, is there? So I'm clearly going full proper football man. But it does feel like someone like Humphreys is just such a quality footballer. I just love him so much, and I'm worried that there's not going to be a place for him in the top 2 tiers of English football. But maybe I'm just being, I'm just worried. Well, yeah. I'm just worried that he's going to get squashed.
He reminds me a little bit of Tom Bayliss in a way, a player who kind of broke into a Coventry side at a very young age, whose technical quality was always very obvious, but he really struggled to make it count. And Humphreys last year couldn't really get into Ipswich's side I kind of struggle to think he's going to get into Ipswich's side next season, even in the Championship, given their the financial muscle that they'll have. But he probably needs to kind of toughen up, and maybe this spell in League One, where he's been a big part of a really good Wycombe side, will do that for him. But yeah, I kind of agree. It feels like it's hard for these players who are just very good on the ball at a kind of League One level to break through and punch through enough to be able to show their qualities consistently.
I did also think that if you're a Wycombe fan and you're looking at Wrexham, you're getting frustrated about the level of points and wins that they're racking up. And you've got this feeling, I think there is a feeling from Wrexham's rivals that they're not that good, right? Surely they're not that good. Like when we played them, they just went long all the time, and like it's agricultural. They didn't look like the second best team in the league. And whether that's true or not, I think you probably watch the highlights back. You see them go ahead through a deflected strike from range that definitely wasn't going in otherwise, and then a penalty that I must admit on first viewing looked very suspect, but I did find an angle shot from the crowd behind the goal. And I actually think it wasn't McMillan's right foot where he goes to stab the ball that catches Rodriguez, but actually his trailing leg, his sort of knee to ankle, clipped him, I thought anyway. But obviously Exeter really lost the wind from their sails after that at 2-0. I'll do Charlton 4, Huddersfield 0, and Stockport 2, Burton 1. As I said, good response from both of these two teams to bounce back from defeat in the previous game. I mean, in very different manner, though. Charlton completely dominant, absolutely sensational from the very first minute, where they went ahead at home to a Huddersfield side with whom they're gunning for promotion likely through the playoffs. And Stockport really making quite heavy weather of their game against Burton, albeit getting a 2-1 win in the end. For Charlton, it's their 8th home win in a row. A great response to losing at Peterborough. They just ran all over Huddersfield here. Reminded me a little bit of that Sheffield United Coventry game of like, okay, this is two pretty good teams, and maybe it won't be all plain sailing, and then one team is just bang at it, bang up for it on a physical level first and foremost, and then confident execution in attack as well. Godden heading at home, a Thierry Small cross in the first minute, and they just didn't let up from there. Just looked like a massive gulf between the two teams, to be honest, which does not bode well for Huddersfield, but absolutely does reflect well on Charlton and Jones at the moment. And Tyrese Campbell scoring 2 goals, the two of the types of goals that you want to see from a player like Campbell, who, yes, he kind of plays through the middle at times, but he does a lot of his best work from the sides, from the left side in particular. One of them a left foot shot into the far corner, the other one dribbling at the defender, cutting in, and then a right foot curler again into the far corner. 2 brilliant finishes. If this signals the spell of Campbell goal scoring, if this unlocks goals for Tyrese Campbell, then League One's got a real problem here, because he's a brilliant all-round player, but goals have been lacking. Just his 4th and 5th league goal of the season, and I'm really hopeful that he is a young player that towards the end of a full season at this level, where he'll have got so much from the manager in particular who loves him, I think maybe we could see him kick on, and that would be really exciting for the playoffs. As for Stockport, Whitton headed them ahead. Tanto Alafe had 3 1-on-1s in total in the game, scored one of them. They were 2-0 up against Burton, but Burton did make them sweat, particularly in the first half. They had Big Corey to thank with some big saves. They had a great block from Ethan Pye as well. The last 15 shots in the game, 13 were taken by Burton, which I wouldn't have expected, because I always think that Stockport at home generally have quite a controlled performance in them defensively as much as anything else. And that obviously wasn't the case here. Burton were able to get quite a lot of opportunities against them. But 3 points go the way of Stockport. The biggest news really in league table terms, George, is the emergence of Reading FC as a top 6 team, because Blackpool beat Bolton, which we'll get onto, because Charlton beat Huddersfield, as I've just mentioned. There was an opportunity, and finally Reading take it. And there's been a few times in the last couple of months where they've drawn games against teams that, if you want to make the top 6, you've got to be beating. They actually did that here, and did so looking pretty good against Peterborough.
Yeah, they did. As you say, Reading are this team in this position now in League One, where we've all been kind of waiting for them to fall away. And there is obvious off-field stuff with Reading, which we'll get onto shortly, which has to play a part. And when you're assessing their potential to perform and to get promoted, especially when expulsion from the league seems like a pretty possible threat. So it kind of gets lost that they are unbeaten since the 1st of February, which is just an unbelievable effort when you consider the loss of not only Ruben Sayers moving to Hull, but also the loss of Sam Smith, their talisman, arguably their best player, their main goal threat. So to go on the run that they have done has been remarkable. And this was another occasion where they came up against a posh side who themselves have been much better recently. A really nice move down the left-hand side, forcing an own goal from Sam Hughes. After 7 minutes or so, Ibiodo missed a really good chance at the back post where the cross played to him, basically an open goal, and he managed to shank it wide, which would have been an equaliser for Posh. Nibs claiming a goal on the goal line, where kind of a deflected shot, which he just prodded over the back, and then Charlie Savage with a goal just after that to make it 3-0 before Kwame Poku made it 3-1. But the performance up to 3-0 was really strong from Reading, and given this puts them in the playoff places, and given teams around dropping points, we thought this could be the right time to press the FOTMob Corner button around Reading FC. Let's hope the curse doesn't exist, because I don't think Reading fans need any more bad news right now.
How are they doing this, George, and who is doing it?
Right, so how are they doing it? Well, their home form is a key reason for that. Of their 62 points they picked up this season, 19 have been away from home, just 4 wins from 18. 43 have been at home, 43 points from 20 games, winning 13, drawing 4, losing 3 is unbelievably strong, a goal difference of 18. So they're one of these many, many teams in the EFL this season whose home form, they're basically just a completely different side of the Medeski compared to away from home. Again, they're a pretty well-rounded goal threat. 36 of their 55 goals have been in open play, but 12 have been from a set piece, 1 direct from a set piece too, so 13 set piece goals from 55, showing that they're not just a team who can attack in open play. In terms of key players, FOTMob rating has Lewis Wing as their best player of the season, with Harvey Nibs and Amadou Mbenge in third. Nibs their top scorer with 13, which is an incredible haul for a player that isn't really an out-and-out striker. And Lewis Wing, who makes headlines for his long-range goal-scoring ability, which we'll get onto in a second. Also a good creator. 5 assists for him, 5 for Savage, 4 for Nibs. Again, showing how key a player as Nibs is, just not from a goal-scoring perspective, but also from a creative one. This is where it gets interesting, and this is why anyone who looks at kind of betting markets will know Reading not priced like a top 6 team every week, basically being priced like a bottom half team, frankly. And a part of that will be because their underlying numbers are not as good as their results. They rank 6th in the league for goals scored per game, 13th for expected goals. So from their 46.3 expected goals this season, they've scored 55, so 9 more goals than you'd anticipate. A pretty hefty overperformance. And also an interesting stat is that they have the lowest big chances missed in the whole league. 26 big chances missed. Compare that to, say, Huddersfield, who are the top on 61. It's a huge swing, that. Part of the reason for that will be because Reading don't create that many big chances, in part because they don't necessarily always play with an out-and-out striker, with a Bishaman only kind of coming in and out of the side recently. But partly also because they're clinical in front of goal, as can be seen by their overperformance from their expected goals. Defensively, it's a similar story. 1.2 goals conceded per game has them 11th, but they have the 4th highest expected goals conceded in the whole league. They've conceded 47 goals from 57 expected, so a 10-goal swing there. So a 10-goal swing from a defensive perspective, a 9-goal swing from an attacking perspective. It's a 19-goal swing compared to their XG. That is mad. And I've got history with Reading and expected goals, and it's not that dissimilar to what we saw under Yapstam in the Championship, when they looked to be a team challenging for promotion to the Premier League, even though their underlying numbers had them as basically a relegation candidate. But given, again, what's going on off the pitch, I think in this case we can just applaud what they're doing rather than try and pick holes in it, because it's so unlikely. And realistically, for them to have success this season, it's probably always going to have to be this way. They're pretty active from a defensive perspective. They're ranked 2nd for successful tackles per game, 6th for clearances per game, and that can be seen in some of their just general defensive numbers individually through the team as well. They're a pretty high intensity side, as you'd expect from a Ruben Sayers side. Keeper, Joel Pereira has been a big part of this. He ranks second for saves per game, 3.4 saves per game. And when you look at his XG, unsurprisingly given what we've already said, but even his expected goals on target, he's preventing goals, 41.2 expected goals on target. So this takes into account shot placement from 143 shots faced, but only conceding 36 goals. So he's preventing 5 goals himself compared to the average. And looking at the season shot map on FOTMOB as well, really strong in terms of only conceding 2 shots from outside the area. That's often an area where poor keepers will massively drop points in the kind of XGOT model, because if you're letting goals in consistently from outside the box and you're letting in low XG chances. But Pereira's a pretty safe pair of hands when it comes to that. And again, you can see from his clean sheet record, his saving record and everything else, he is someone who is really strong and a player that I think we can. Pereira, I think, as a keeper, who stands out this season as being one of the best in the league. A couple more players just to point out. Tyler Bindon is one who's rise up the ranks, we say, has been pretty well documented, and meant that Nottingham Forest bought him in January and loaned him back out to the club. Someone who is really comfortable on the ball, ranks highly for successful passes, pass accuracy of 82%. Playing centre-back for a team who aren't necessarily particularly possession-heavy, says how good he is on the ball. He's also a good carrier, 73% success dribble rate. Again, for a centre-back is pretty impressive, but also just a really strong defender. Tackles won percentage is really strong. His duels numbers are all really high. Interceptions, blocks, everything else. He's the real deal in terms of being a really possession comfortable centre back who can also do the defensive side of things. Now, Lewis Wing's shot map is obviously absolutely insane. Just loads of shots from absolutely miles out. But the thing is with Lewis Wing is he's quite good at them. He scored 5 goals from next year, 3.17 from 71 shots. That is an unbelievably low number. But when you look at the actual shot placement of his shots on target, you can see that he finds corners relatively regularly. Even the ones that are saved are generally not straight at the keeper. Yes, he's only hits the target with 24% of his shots, but I think that's kind of because he's aiming for the corner rather than some people who shoot from distance who just try and get it on target. And that's a big reason why we probably see him score more long-range goals than you'd expect from most players. A massive underrated part of his game is his creative ability. He's got 5 assists this season, but that comes from 7.61 expected assists. And given that Reading are massively overperforming their XG, it's kind of weird to see that he's underperforming his XA by 2.6. He's been unbelievably unfortunate not to pick up more assists than he has done this season. 62 chances created. He's been the main creative force for them in the middle of the park. And he's an okay ball carrier too. And he gets into the box with 28 touches in opposition box so far this season. And his defensive numbers, again, really strong. Good for duels. Tackles won, 70% odd. Aerial duels, 60%. Like, he's someone who can carry himself in the middle of the park. And I personally, hold my hands up and think that I've always seen Lewis Wing as a bit of a one-trick pony. Yeah. But there's no denying this season he's showing himself to be way, way more than just a long-range shooting merchant. Finally, Harvey Nibbs, 13 goals from 10.9 expected. Again, he's someone who his goal output is good. His creative output is good, but he's also another one who's really active on the defensive side of things too, gets stuck in consistently. He's someone who doesn't shirk the defensive side of the game, and that's been a really important part of their play, especially him winning possession in the final third 21 times, leading the press for Reading really effectively. So, yeah, they're massively overperforming most metrics, but there's loads to like in terms of what Reading are doing, and I, like every other football fan out there, putting any rivalries aside too, not that I believe in R1 with them, just hope that we get to see this Reading season come to fruition and see where this team can go, and hope that it's not cruelly cut short.
Yeah, there's a big date of sorts at the end of this week, April the 5th. That's in theory anyway. We mentioned last week that De Jong has been disqualified by the EFL as an owner. It means he has to divest his ownership of the club by that point, and that's obviously on Saturday. And based on his inability and seeming lack of desire to do anything productive or that could help the club move past him, one doesn't really know how that's, whether a deal will be struck by then, whether he will continue to provide obstacles to that. I think it's one of those where I don't really want to speculate, but I would be surprised if Reading are kicked out of the EFL on April the 5th, if this hasn't happened yet. I believe that the EFL are doing absolutely everything in their power to avoid that eventuality. I don't think that there will be a huge appetite from any other circles for Reading to be kicked out for this. I think the appetite is for them to be saved and for everything possible to be done for that. If you look back at the situation with Bury, there were quite a few extensions on various deadlines that they had to secure their future as well. So I would hope to see an extension on this if it's not sorted by then. And we just hope that Dye is extricated, if you like, and a new ownership in place ASAP, basically. But because of this deadline, Reading are now getting the national media outlets doing the big pieces on the issue, which is it's always a shame that it takes this for that to happen, but it's obviously a good thing, even though still a lot of the power lies in the hands of Dai Yong and various other people involved in these legal deals as well. But the club are doing their best to keep the fans up to date. It's just very difficult, I guess, for them to really give any clarity when deals are ongoing, when there's a lot of confidentiality clauses in place. So, we celebrate what Reading are doing on the pitch into the top six. And, I must admit, I'm absolutely desperate for them to make the playoffs. I think it would be an incredible achievement, and I just want them to win basically every game at the moment because of what they're going through off the field. We had some sneaky big winners just in that playoff shake-up in the form of Blackpool and Orient. Blackpool beating Bolton by 2-1. Fletcher and Ennis scoring again, this top two for Blackpool, who have, Steve Bruce has done a great job to help them both get through periods of lacking confidence in front of goal. And, he's getting the reward now. Fletcher and Ennis have scored 11 goals in their last 9 games combined. That's the sort of strike force that's the absolute envy of the level where there aren't that many goal-scoring strikers. For Blackpool, the win very much came against the run of play, or Ennis's winner. Nice goal as it was too, running in behind and lobbing over the goalkeeper. But Bolton had the majority of pressure at that point, having got it back to 1-1 through a Collins header, cancelling out Fletcher's goal. But Blackpool, got in front and then held out. So happy days for them. So it's the first team they've beaten at home this season above 17th in the table. They are top scorers in the league in 2025. That's 3 months worth of football, with the highest non-penalty XG as well. So not just a hot streak for Blackpool, genuinely creating the most chances in the league at the moment. And that's a good place to be. They are at home to 6th placed Reading on Tuesday night with 5 points between the two teams. Blackpool Reading will be the one that I watch on Tuesday night. Orient thinking they're still in the mix as well, having beaten Stevenage 1-0 on Thursday night. Really poor game in truth, and they didn't have a shot, Orient, after the 12th minute, but they had the lead at that point. Charlie Kelman with another goal, nice instinctive header to win them the game. He's third in the goal scoring charts in League One. He scored the most non-penalty goals, as we've said before, and has done unbelievably well for them this season. Keeley in goal was important here as well. No unbelievable saves, but just very sound handling when he was called upon to secure the win for Orient. So that's the playoff battle. Only 2 teams in the bottom half won, but one of them was a pretty significant performance, result, everything really. Rotherham 0, Crawley 4. Scott Lindsay walked back into Crawley. They beat Bristol Rovers 1-0 last weekend, and Rovers are really bad away from home. So I thought, well, maybe Rovers were just really bad, and maybe this is just a one-off flash in the pan, little new manager bounce, but, still no hope for Crawley, surely. Then they go to Rotherham and they win 4-0. Now, yes, they've beaten a team that end up sacking their manager, and that probably sums up the whole vibe of Rotherham United and the fan base ahead of this game. But the performance was incredibly exciting from a Crawley point of view, and particularly from young Kamari Doyle, George, who is just an absolute delight.
Yeah, some player. 2 brilliant finishes for the first and the second goal here. I'm really intrigued to see what's going to happen with him. He's a player that Brighton bought, and when Brighton buy players, generally they're not far off. Given how recently they bought him, I'd be amazed if he was being written off now. I think he's probably a player that they, have aspirations to break into the first team, but no time soon. I reckon there will be. Most championship sides will be looking to bring him in next season. He looks way too good for League One. And it's interesting that they to manage his development, they obviously took him out of Exeter in January and sent him to Crawley, which on the face of it didn't look like a particularly obvious move or a particularly obvious reason why you would do that. taking a player out of a side struggling League One and sending him to a side who is struggling even more. But maybe just because of the way that Crawley likes to play and approach games, it's been an absolute masterstroke, whoever made that decision. And he may not be a player that Scott Lindsay brought into Crawley, but he's one that he's inherited, and he's one that I think he's going to absolutely love working with, and we're already seeing the fruits of that. 2 brilliant finishes, the second of which kind of a very unique strike. He just dug the ball out with his right foot into the bottom left-hand corner. The ball didn't fall easily to him, but it didn't bother him at all, and he managed to finish it off. It's this Scott Lindsay story, and Scott Lindsay's whole career really, where Swindon pretty happy to see him go. Crawley takes him up with some bonkers playoff performances after massively overperforming during the season compared to their underlying numbers. Goes to MK Dons, oversees a remarkable winning run that season, go from mid-table into playoff promotion contention, and then oversees a run of form which sees them basically the worst team in the league. Like, if not the worst team, one of the worst 2 or 3 teams in the whole division, with probably one of the most valuable squads in the whole league. And then goes to Crawley and immediately turns their fortunes around. Like, anyone who thinks that this managerial stuff is easy, or it's easy to work out what's going to happen, or certain managers guarantee this or that, it's just nonsense. Like, there are so many different factors at play, and for whatever reason, right now, Scott Lindsay and Crawley Town just works. And this was I thought that Rob Elliott didn't do a particularly bad job at Crawley. He seemed to take on a side that was struggling. They had some good moments. He continued the kind of attacking ethos, but it looked like they were going to come unstuck and drop away. But under Lindsay, Crawley now look like they've got a fighting chance of staying up.
6 points again now.
Result and performance was just unbelievable.
On the flip side, it led to the sacking of Steve Evans as Rotherham manager. This has not gone well. We often say when Steve Evans is appointed somewhere that you can generally bank on a good season or two, but that he generally leaves behind normally a squad composition that is generally older and quite expensive, and generally quite high wage bills as we perceive it. Rotherham might find that out without having got the good stuff, because this is going to be their lowest league finish since 2012-13. This is a team that got very used to challenging for titles and winning promotion in League One under Paul Warne, and probably expected that a serial promotion challenger in Steve Evans might give them that opportunity, particularly when he went out early on in the transfer window and acquired a lot of senior pros with a lot of experience of winning promotion out of this level. It has gone terribly. The team has almost never this season looked anything like what a Steve Evans team at its best is meant to look like. However you decide that that's come to be the case, whether he, whether his training methods weren't good enough, whether his man management just didn't work on this group of players where it has done previously, whether it was something to do with the weight of expectation, whether it was going back to a club where he'd been before and maybe, you remember the best times, and maybe when someone goes back, you realize why you kind of parted company in the first place. I don't really necessarily know the answers, but this is a really messy situation, George, and it's not necessarily one where I'm like, oh, well, Evans was the only issue, and Rotherham will be fine, and they'll get back to challenging at the top end of League One, next season. I think they're in a really tough spot because they've got one of the oldest teams in the league. Their youngest players are 26. So Nombe, Joe Powell, and Cameron Humphreys are all 26. Hakeem Adoffin is 27. Those are the youngest players that are playing regularly this season. Humphreys and Adoffin both out of contract. Nombe's runs for another couple of years, and I think Powell's does as well, as he only signed last summer. But it's just like a team that has been famously yo-yoing between League One and the Championship for as long as I can remember, and now would be astounded if they get back to the Championship anytime soon. And yeah, it's somewhat concerning.
I think with Evans, when you appoint him, you've got to hope it goes right, because as you say, he's not necessarily the manager who leaves things in the best condition for whoever takes on afterwards, unless they want a squad full of relatively old players who want to play a certain way. It kind of feels to me like Steve Evans' managerial style, I think it's way too lazy to just say like, oh, it doesn't work anymore, because very recently he did, as I've said many times, one of the best managerial jobs at a team that we've seen in the last decade, where at Stevenage, what he did at Stevenage over a short period of time was absolutely ridiculous. But I just think he's suited to being at the David, like at the clubs where they kind of feel lucky to have him, and they kind of buy into his weird inferiority complex. Like, you almost need to buy into his whole thing of saying that, we're battling, we're punching up, and we're doing unbelievably to be where we are. As soon as he comes into a side with ambition and a feeling that they belong at the level and a feeling like they should be succeeding, he seems to struggle. It was the case at Gillingham, obviously, where he was unable to do much there, and in Rotherham, a team who've been relegated from the Championship, who are used to battling the top end of this league, he struggled again. So it feels like he needs a certain club profile, and Rotherham may have been that when he was last there, but certainly weren't that this time round. But yeah, I kind of agree. Like, where do Rotherham go now? It's interesting that they've done the same as Huddersfield, and they've looked to appoint a manager immediately to the end of the season. That seems to suggest they don't think that there's any chance of them getting relegated. Well, it's a massive long shot, but they need to pick up a couple of points relatively soon, because if the likes of Crawley and Burton continue playing the way they're playing, the points tally they're currently on isn't beyond reach, and things could get quite nervous for them if they don't put a couple of points on the board to just make sure that they've got enough there.
Bristol Rovers are not doing themselves any favours. They lost 2-1 at home to Mansfield. The goals that Mansfield score are so unbelievably embarrassing from a Bristol Rovers point of view. I was going to say the defending is poor, but it's not even the defending. It's passing out from the back. The first one, they're already passing it around the back at a glacial pace. There doesn't seem to be much vim or intent in the way that they're knocking it about anyway. But Jed Ward passes it straight to Will Evans, who intercepts, squares it for Caelan Vickers, who does his best to trip over the ball rather than tap it into an empty net, but does get there eventually. Bristol Rovers then get back level, but then shoot themselves in the foot again. This time Caleb Taylor at the back, basically just tripping over the ball. Really poor technically piece of play, and the goal is scored by Dominic Dwyer. So 2 new Mansfield names really scoring the goals. Caelan Vickers, who's on loan from Brighton. He's a former Reading Youth Academy product, a real live wire, really speedy, nimble attacking player. And then Dominic Dwyer is kind of an interesting one, because I seem to remember him scoring in every single MLS game he ever played between 2014 and 2018. And then I basically haven't heard his name since then. And it's kind of mad that because I remember at the time, he became quite a big deal over in the States, but he's an English player, but he was one of those guys who never made an impact in the UK, but ripped it up in MLS. It's his first ever goal in English football, which is quite nice at the ripe old age of, I think, 34. He's clearly had a really tough time in the last few years, and Nigel Clough has decided that he can be a bit of a reclamation job for him. So he gets the winning goal here. For Rovers, it's just a big because Crawley are 6 points back, Burton are 6 points back, both looking fairly decent the last couple of weeks. In 3 of their next 4, Bristol Rovers have got Birmingham, Bolton, Wrexham. And if they don't pick up any points from those games, those teams are going to be even closer with a couple of games to go. And the consistency with which they put in poor performances is just desperate, really, really desperate. Cambridge drew 1-1 with Northampton, Hoskins finishing off after a long throw, and then Brophy equalising with an Olympic goal straight from a corner. The result not hugely helpful for either. Northampton, not giving themselves a huge cushion, the bottom 4 with Crawley winning, and Cambridge clearly now somewhat doomed. And Wigan's first game under Ryan Lowe ended 1-1 against Barnsley. Keylor Dunn with a free kick, and then Asamoah equalising for Wigan. Real mix-up between the young keeper Flavel and De Givigny. Asamoah tapping into an open net. And Ryan Lowe going with a 3-5-2 in his first game. Not hugely surprising, a system we've seen him use before. League 1, League 2 level to great effect. With Johnny Smith left wing back, Owen Dale right wing back. I'm hopeful that with this setup, with Ryan Lowe getting his teeth into things, we might start to see a Wigan team that attacks with a little more pizzazz, with a little more fluidity, with a little more quality. And the first point that Wigan have picked up this season in a game where they've been trailing. The first time that they have both come from behind and then not gone back behind, which had happened in 3 other occasions. That's the end of the League 1 segment.